Hello. Welcome back to the JRB podcast with myself, Ryan Levine, joined here by Jeff Jones and Bohdan.
Hello.
Hey, how you
It
going?
has been quite a while, so just some, little announcements. We've in the interim since our last episode, we've uploaded like a couple things, like some random universes stuff. I've still been playing that game, and I've still been getting sent various products and some card reveals that may or may not be up by the time this goes up. I think right after this goes up, there will be our first exclusive card reveal for that game. It's never before seen card that they are having us introduce. But yeah, if universes is not what you're at this channel for, no big deal. But if it is something, if you care to learn, we will have some resources for that at some point, and we have stuff about it, and I like it a lot. So it is my other game I'm playing right now, other than Yu-Gi-Oh, and we are all also pretty much back to playing Yu-Gi-Oh now as well too. The last couple episodes we've kind of been, I think it's been mostly burnout, which I know that you two have more to talk about as well with that, but all three of us I think kind of felt pretty burnt out about Yu-Gi-Oh recently, and we did need some time off, not only of playing but also of recording the podcast, because talking about Yu-Gi-Oh for 2 hours, every other week when you really don't care was kind of even more draining. And I think our most recent episode exemplified that quite a bit, to the point that we almost just deleted it because we were like, this is pretty bad and not really,
Hmm.
there's nothing really, worthwhile listening to here. But we decided to keep it up because whatever. And hopefully this one will be a return to form. We have a little bit more structure for this one. We're going to talk about Niagara, the most recent YCS, talking about the impact that the most recent set had on the metagame, the top cut, the breakdown, and we're going to go a little more in depth on, I think, the top four decks. What was what we decided?
Yeah.
We're talking about the new prizing for the YCSs, in case you hadn't heard about that, because it really wasn't advertised. You kind of had to be there to see it, to be honest. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about Master Duel and how it's changed, and kind of how we've been engaging with it and Yu-Gi-Oh as a whole, as well. But I know you two had other stuff you want to talk about before we get into it.
Yeah.
So
I think the biggest thing that well, myself specifically, I can't really speak for you guys. It did feel like it was kind of stagnant, Yu-Gi-Oh! That is. And obviously, external factors. You sort of look to a game for an escape. My circumstances are obviously different given my location. And if I had the option to travel to multiple events in the current tenure, I would welcome it solely to see people. But now I would like to say I would do it because I think the game is in a good place. I like that they're being a lot more receptive. At the time, we felt like everything was falling on deaf ears, but there is uh, communication, transparency to some extent between Konami and the player base now. Yeah, and like I'm just happy to see what the future brings. I'm very excited. And there's a lot of other stuff we're gonna probably talk about, maybe not in this episode, but like leading up to 2025, where I think there's a lot of cool stuff. Like, even just today we had reveals for the set coming out in January, and that'll be the set that's legal for YCS Vegas and YCS Sydney, which will be end of February for Sydney slash March, 28th to 1st. And then you have Vegas, which is 2 weeks afterwards as well. So I think there's like a really big shift coming, and we have these nice pockets where like new stuff is going to sort of like come together, and nothing seems particularly ridiculous, knock on wood, outside of the stuff that we already know is coming out. There's a lot of cool unique stuff. I feel like there's just more fun stuff happening with Yu-Gi-Oh, and we'll just wait and see, right? Can't be a doomer about it until it actually happens, and then we'll eat our words, and then we'll be upset again. Hopefully not, but yeah, I'm happy to see what the future is bringing for the game for sure.
For me, I feel like I kind of want to take a lot of blame for not doing the podcast lately. Before the previous podcast, I was in a pretty bad place mentally and emotionally. And the last podcast we did was in the very first days of me starting like depression and anxiety meds, and I felt absolutely terrible. I did not want to be there. I didn't want anything to do with Yu-Gi-Oh or card games or anything really. And now that I'm kind of acclimated to my meds, I feel a lot better. And I'm hoping to get back on a more regular schedule with both the podcast and Yu-Gi-Oh. So that's pretty good.
Which
And
there were a
I'm
lot of
really
factors for
excited
that
for.
for you, right? That wasn't
Yeah,
just out of
yeah,
the blue. There was a lot of
Mm.
external factors that
yeah,
we don't
yeah.
have
And
to get into
obviously
specifically,
that's
but
yeah,
yeah.
that's something that I think a lot of people, that can happen. The game's a game, right? Even if it is a big part of your life, I think you do have to focus on the more important things, right? And I think a lot of people sort of neglect that. And it's good to talk about. So, I think we've all been there, and I'm sure people listening have also been there. So they can definitely understand. You got to take a break sometimes, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think both Ryan and I are definitely more active in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, at least for the physical game. Where Bohdan is more active in like Master Duel right now.
Yeah.
But we're all. I'm pretty. I've been wanting to play a lot more. Like I just want to go and kind of enjoy the game. Like I played at locals 2 times this week already, just because I just wanted to play and hang out with my friends. So
There's just
um,
a lot of fun new stuff, right? There's like a lot of puzzles that are, waiting to be solved, I think. And maybe not even necessarily solved. And obviously there's new stuff coming out in between. But just, this will probably lead into we don't have anything else we want to talk about in this opening announcement thing, but I guess we can maybe lead into Niagara, which is the first step of like this new puzzle, right? We have the new set coming out. It's ROTA. There's a lot of impactful cards. There's a lot of cards that mesh with the stuff that we had before. But it feels like nothing's on this like distinct power level above other stuff. So Ryan, do you want to get into Niagara?
Yeah. So
well,
let's
right before that, I
yeah.
just want to mention
Go ahead.
that I think a lot of locals also have suffered with the previous kind of format before the Forbidden List and even a little bit after. Um, Mine included. I usually have a really big locals, and mine was down to like 20 people on average. And yesterday was even after the Forbidden List came out, there was still only like 20 people. But after the Forbidden List and now this new set came out, we had like basically 40 people again last night. So I think a lot of people are also not just me and Ryan and whoever else are excited to play Yu-Gi-Oh. I think a lot more other people are excited to play Yu-Gi-Oh as well.
Just cool
Um,
new stuff, right?
yeah,
Like there's
Yeah.
just which I
So
guess yeah.
well, we had cool new stuff before, but it didn't
It,
feel as good, right?
it
Like it
didn't feel
felt
as
like
good because it didn't match up with the stuff that already
it was
existed as
also
well.
significantly more
Yeah.
oppressive, I think. So maybe it's a testament to like what the Forbidden and Limited list did. People saying it didn't do that much. You know what? Look at attendance. Look at the amount of unique decks, but unique decks without huge power level disparities, right? Like that's the big thing that I think has really come from all of this, like the new set releases and the new ban list. You just see all of these decks have the ability to perform, but you still see the same people doing quite well, and some people are doing well, with unique strategies. Like I'm sure Ryan is foaming at the mouth to talk about the Bestial Centurion deck that Pac went undefeated with, that Ryan also played at the event.
Yeah.
There's just like stuff like that you have to look at, you explore, and I think the format's pretty wide open for the most part. Obviously, there'll be decks, the outliers that are just above the rest, but I don't think the gap is too far gone, right? Compared to
no,
like prior formats where it's like these decks are so powerful, like just nothing matters.
no, yeah, I really think that it is quite close in power level between 4 decks. Like
Mm.
maybe a slight need to
They're not
like.
doing anything like really unfair, right? That's like the one thing I've sort of seen is like they're not doing anything particularly ridiculous compared to where we were at prior. With stuff like Beatrice being legal, like the Apollosis, stuff like that, just being able to
I mean, I
interact through
still
like
think the
big
U-Bell
free
field
hand
is
trap.
pretty crazy, but now you
I
have
think I
like
think that is one, yeah, for sure. I think that is still a silly deck.
but now it has like now you have like 6 chummies, and both the
Mm.
chummies are good against that deck. So now there's like a
Well,
little bit
even
more.
cards like Impulse as well, right? Like Impulse functions into that deck similar to a bunch of your other hand traps without turning on stuff like talents or otherwise.
It
There's like
also can't
another
be
layer
Phantom of
there.
U-Build, which is
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
important.
big one.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Before we step into like the specific Niagara meta game and breakdown, I do want to just give a little bit of consideration to like ROTA as a whole and like kind of what we were expecting going into it, and then maybe kind of how the results may have lined up what we thought or may have gone against it. So I think like
Mm.
the key generic cards of ROTA were for sure the star of the show was Molcharmi Fua. That Fua loss. That's been a card that people have been dooming about for a while, and I'm sure if we had recorded some episodes since the last one, we would have probably done the same thing. I
You would
must
see
say,
a big shift, I think. Maybe you'd probably see us say, "Oh, it's the end of Yu-Gi-Oh!" into like,
I must
"This is
say,
actually probably okay."
I must say, while I still do not think Purulia is a fantastic card,
Mhm.
I was a little harsh on it, a lot harsh on it last episode, if anybody even remembers that, months ago, because I knew it would not be as good as the people doom posting about it. And I was just mad. I was just
Yes.
so mad at all of the people on Twitter. Like, it just, God, it was just so frustrating opening Twitter and seeing 1,000 people be like, Purulia is broken. It will be $200 and yada yada yada. It'll be, if you don't have it, you can't win. And then it ended up seeing play, but it was not that. And
No.
now
Yeah, I remember saying
Fua might be that, and we're gonna talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember saying with before it was because Purulia came out before the WCQ for us,
Yeah.
and I said, "Do not pay $100 for this card."
Yeah, for sure.
I do not. If
Well,
this
you
card's
were right.
$100,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. I said if this card's $100, do not pay for it. But it's probably
Yeah.
going to be in my side deck. It was in my side deck for that event,
Yep.
and it was really good against my Snake Eye mirrors that I did not lose against. And like we said before, this is for more very niche matchups, whereas Fua Lost is more broad, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both of those cards sort of solve the issue. No, not necessarily solve. Maybe it's a band-aid. Maybe we are just the dog in that meme where the house is on fire and he's just sitting there drinking coffee like this is fine. But in my opinion, and this is like gonna be a hot take, I
Mhm.
think when the game is too far gone, in terms of just like we can't, break it down and then go from the bottom and rebuild up, right? I think doing band-aids like this can be refreshing. As R&D releases, it's either going to be through power creep, forbidden and limited lists, like otherwise. Cards like this definitely do help um, with fatigue in the game because they do sort of just give you more playback than you generally would have. Obviously, like these ones specifically compared to Maxi, where Maxi can be there when you are going first and you make a board and Maxi is oppressive and it's, the most evil card in the game. These sort of function so uniquely, differently, and they achieve different things. And I think like we need more stuff like that when the game gets a little bit too silly, right? Like cards like this are very well designed in that respect. They can be limiting sometimes, but I think that just having these as options in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is a really good thing. And that might eat my words later. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. But I genuinely think these have enhanced the play experience for me. Even though it has been limited, I have definitely felt a lot better. And there's like little intricacies and stuff that we've sort of noted, and like identifying decks that function better into these cards compared to others. Like you again, it'll come back to Pack undefeated with the Visceral Centurion deck, and he would say, "I got shifted, Periliad, and Forwast, and it just didn't matter." Like my opponent just discarded 3 cards for nothing, and I think that's really unique, and it's just like something that adds more depth to the game. So like while these cards are very powerful, I think they do add these layers to it, and it's like identifying what's meant to work when these cards exist versus like, oh, these cards exist, like let's just ignore it, pretend it's not there. Like it's gonna happen anyway. Like, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh's ruined. Like just identifying decks that just ignore these cards while still utilizing these cards, but they don't always have to ignore. Like probably losing my train of thought, but that's sort of where I'm at with these cards specifically. Up from like the Doom end for like the Perilia and Furor, but yeah.
I mean, after playing with them, and I think it was only so obvious because it was juxtaposed with the fact that we had like just played the Duelist Cup and Master Duel, where we essentially just sit on our computer jamming games for 12 hours and then getting Maxi'd a million times, which like having just played 100 games into Maxi, like in a very short amount of time, and then a couple weeks later,
Save that thought. But yes.
Yeah.
Before we get too deep into Master,
correct. I'm just saying, like, this card is not Maxi, like, yeah. and I think it is extremely reductive to refer to these cards as just Maxi, because and I think a lot of the people saying that are like Fua is closer to Maxi than Purulia is, but
Yes,
even
this
so,
card draws cards when cards are special
yeah,
summon.
yeah,
Yes.
even
You
so,
know what I mean? Like, yes,
yeah,
it is
yeah,
Maxi in that respect.
yeah, but they are like the power level of these cards is so wildly different. Like it's
there's playback,
ugh,
right? Like
yeah.
that's what we want. Like you can do different things to offset how broken these cards can be.
Yeah,
That's just what Yu-Gi-Oh should be.
because
You should be able to have an option to not get destroyed, right?
so I will say, because what I will say is I feel like Maxi restricting special summons in general is something that is so broad. There isn't a whole lot you can do in the deck building and borderline even the deck selection part of the game to offset Maxi. Like the argument is like play
Ash
stun,
Blossom
and it's
Cold
like
Bag
that's
cross
not
out, right?
really for Fua. I think one, even if you just do your whole combo, for Fua they're drawing 3 to 4 cards. For Maxi they're drawing 11, right? Like generally, right? So that's the first thing, is the number of cards you're drawing is not even comparable. And two, I think there are definitely ways like you can build your deck or sequence things where you create sort of a mid ground. Like I also don't think there was really any middle ground for Maxi. A lot of the times when you get Maxied, you're giving them 2 draws to end on literally nothing, right?
Yeah.
Just you just stop
There was
completely.
some
But
niche interactions that we found when we were testing with the other Europeans to Master Duel last year. And the big thing was the runic cards, right? So it's like the Naturia runic deck where it would be like, okay, you're gonna summon the mole cricket, activate the effect, your opponent's in a maxi, you're gonna chain a runic card, it's gonna summon a runic, it's gonna, get you into that sort of engine. You're really only giving them like 1 to 2 draws to do the sort of same thing you would be doing normally. So like cards that interact in that way. It's like a sort of unique layer there. And these are more relevant, like you said, for cards like Fua compared to Maxi specifically, because at that point, like if Fua happens and you chain a runic card, good, you deny a draw and then you get to do the basic level stuff. I don't know where I was going with the rest of this, but that's my Maxi playback, right? Like just
right. I mean, like, I made a deck choice around Fua being popular, and we'll go into that later when we talk about the runic deck. But I just think like these cards are not these cards are not as strong as Maxi. It's not even close. I am gonna say, but obviously they are going to be relevant for a little while, and it could end up being another one of those situations where they're just played in every deck and the play pattern gets really stale and eventually they have to be addressed. But as they are quite new, I'm probably going to be less doom and gloom on them right now than I think a lot of other people will be. There's also the maybe inevitability of, do we think there will be a third one in the next set or the set after that draws for Graven Banished? And when that happens, and now people's side decks could potentially be 9, and you slot in the 6 that are best against your opponent or whatever, like then where are we going with that, right? Because that is the biggest
Pokemon
problem.
trading card game at that point.
Yeah. where the fact that you can activate 2 of them per turn is kind of where I felt they got a little bit oppressive sometimes. Where like when you get double Fua'd or you get Fua Purulia'd, those are the turns you might just pass, similar to how Maxi would make you pass. But then they're discarding 2 cards versus 1, yada yada yada. Anyways, I'm sure we have more to talk about Fua, but we probably need to or Jeff, did you have something you want to say about Fua first before we?
Yeah.
I
was just going to say I am more on the opposite side, where I still think like
these are broken.
Fua is super broken, and it warps a lot of deck building where you will see people maining cross out or siding 3 cross out for going first. And that's the kind of stuff I really don't like, when your entire, like, it is a card that is going to be in most people's main decks, and thus your side deck is going to be like for that stuff. And you see that with, like, if you look at Jesse's deck, like Jesse and I worked together for a little bit on our decks, and we came to like the same conclusion where it is very rare that you see a lot of your side deck dedicated to going first, because most Yu-Gi-Oh decks are great at going first anyway.
Yes,
The problem was always going second. But now we had stuff like 3 cross out, 3 thrust, and multiple trap cards in our deck for when we went first and got like Perulian
Yes.
and Fu Wood. And that way we had something where like we could end on a more mediocre field, but still have a way to like combat our opponent's turn. And you still see that. So like
So something I do want to argue is I think a lot of that was also because of Tenpai existing. Because when you get Fuwood against Tenpai, almost specifically, if you don't have those cards, you're just dead. Because your cards don't even necessarily stop them. So I will say, I agree with what you're saying to some extent, but I also think the existence of Tenpai and the relevance of Tenpai maining or siding all 6 of them probably warped your deck, probably warped your side deck a little bit more as well. But I do agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
It absolutely did. But those cards, except for Dimensional Barrier, were still going in my deck going first against the other decks anyway.
Sure.
So like my side deck was like 3 thrust, 3 Dimensional Barrier. Before this, going into the weekend, Ryan showed up and came to my home. And I was like, yeah, I think Tenpai is going to be actually crazy popular. And it was. And then Jesse was like, yeah, I think it's going to be crazy popular too. And we dedicated our side deck to like, yeah, a crazy amount for Tenpai. But still, even, regardless of that, the 3 thrust and like a good trap card to set off of thrust was still going in against basically every other deck I was playing against, because I expected if I was going first in a sided game that they were going to have stuff like Perulia, Fuwa, and whatever other hand traps they were having. And I really don't like that personally. And there's the 2 matches I lost in Niagara where my opponent went first game 3 and they cross-outed my Fuwa. One person cross-outed 2 of my Fuwas, and you'll say, how is that possible? And you know what? I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to get mad about it. But the one
you told me this. Sorry, that was funny.
The one that did resolve, my opponent just passed their turn, and the one Fuwa that resolved against me, I just passed my turn and had to hope my opponent couldn't kill me. They could kill me, by the way. And I think that's still, instead of like these Band-Aid cards, I would rather them just fix the decks they're making. Is kind of where I'm going with this, because I think
that's ideal. I think
agree. I think they opened a different can of worms, and But
I think the other option is the in-between, right? Because there's just so many gaps between OCG and TCG and communication and everything else. I feel like this is the mid-ground. It's not an ideal one, but it's a little bit more player-friendly than what we had prior. I don't hate it, but I can see where it might get boring, like Ryan said, and I can see the issues that that you've identified as well. It's just to be expected. I think maybe it's just more refreshing to have a card like that. And I think, again, shoot me if I'm wrong, if Max C was unbanned, I think people would probably feel the same way, and they'd say, wow, Yu-Gi-Oh feels pretty good again. I have Max C, all these unfair decks are now kept in check.
Yeah,
and
I think
that's from people playing it, by the way. That's the people that say no, Maxi is evil. Like that won't happen. Like there will be a vocal majority just from playing a Maxi based format that will say this is awesome. But it'll obviously go downhill quite quickly. But I think that would be the sentiment.
Yeah, I from playing Master Duel, there were talking with the fucking world champion of Master Duel about this, and you guys. I think you can understand that. In Master Duel, Maxi carries a lot of people's games who should not be winning normally. Yeah. Because the decks are so powerful that if your opponent can't put up multiple layers of interaction, the decks are so powerful and easy that they could mess up 100 times and still kill you if you don't have a Maxi also.
Those are also more evident because of the best of one process, but
yes.
Like you're not wrong.
So
like,
where I'm going with this is because of this, I think also Fuwa will feel really good to a lot of people whose skill level is like not up to a par with a lot of other people, because they will be able to be like, oh, I don't have to play through an entire field. This is much more manageable. And so in general, I think the average duelist will like Fuwa more than someone who is like more competitive like
And
me.
then the average player playing against a competitive player, or even just someone of a similar skill level, there'll be a percentage of the time where Fua is the best card in the game, and there'll be a percentage of the time where your opponent basically hand loop themselves for one, and there'll be a percentage of the time where it cycles for one, right? Like there's this like weird sort of mid ground, and I
Yeah.
think obviously as more games are played in TCG format, you will see the people be upset or the people lean towards one side, but it's always going to be that like 1/3 every single time, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
someone's going to have the best experience possible. Someone is going to say like, why did I spend $200 on, or whatever it is in America now, like what, 140? Why did I spend 140 on this? Why did or it's just like, oh cool, like this card did what it was supposed to do in a very fair fashion. My opponent got to play, I drew one card, it replaced itself, tops. Now we get to go to my turn. Like
Yeah.
it's gonna be a weird thing. I want to wait and see how it unfolds, but for
Yeah.
now I guess we can get into Niagara unless you have some.
It is funny because like when it comes to the cards I hate most in Yu-Gi-Oh are the cards that are extremely polarizing, and by that I mean the cards that either are super broken or do absolutely nothing. So cards like that are like Droll and Lockbird. That card is
Triple tactics talents,
triple
right?
tactics talent. The card either does
That's a big
nothing or
one.
can almost single-handedly win you the game. And this is like kind of on the same thing where like my one of my opponents just passed with after I fooed him, and then I basically just killed him. And then another person yesterday at my or 2 days ago at my locals, my opponent fooed me, and I had like 3 hand traps, and I was like, I think I can live. And then they were playing Tenpai, I could not live. And the opposite was true, where I would activate Fuwa and my opponent would just summon one guy and have 3 hand traps, and I couldn't play through their hand traps either. So it's really weird how sometimes it can just, yeah, like you said, end your opponent's turn or hand loop them for one. And yeah, those are just cards I do not like. I would like them to be more in like this middle ground where they're just okay most of the time. But yeah, we can go on to into Niagara.
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to start or should
Yeah,
I?
so
Or do you want to add
just
more to this?
I want to talk about 3 more cards, not as in depth as Fua, but from this set, just the most impactful cards. Dominus Impulse, which I think I underestimated this card for sure. I think it's
I think a lot of
because
people did.
yeah,
Oh, I
It's
did
really
not.
good.
But I think that's
underestimated it.
because I'm looking forward so much to like crossover breakers,
Sure.
and like this card is so broken.
I was underestimating it because I was not evaluating it for its own effect. I was evaluating it based on Dominus Purge and the restrictions that it places on you, and it just didn't occur to me how much easier it is to ignore Light Earth Wind in your deck than Dark Fire Water. And the decks that can play this card played it very, very well and did very well. And it was maybe like the difference maker between certain engines being good and certain ones don't. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about Fiendsmith maybe already being bad after one set because in part of this card, in part of the ban list. And then the other cards I want to talk about, Deception of the Sinful Spoils and the Azaminas in general. Obviously, incredibly, incredibly powerful card, and we'll go into those decks, I guess. And then kind of the 2 runners up. One of them maybe shouldn't be runner up. Are Lacrima, the Crimson Tears, which is the new Fiendsmith support card, and then the one that I definitely underestimated the most. I knew this card would be good, but I like it's in Master Duel. Is a Fire King Courtier Volcanics, which I knew this card would be good, but I don't think I really processed how good using this engine and Dominus Impulse was versus using Fiendsmith and not having Dominus Impulse.
Yeah. We can touch on that because I felt the same. I did not think it would perform, but the ban list definitely gave it some more credence. It's
Mhm.
like a lot more layered, gives you a lot more reach, provides more bodies, gives you another negate if needed. It's really good. We can get into that more in depth because from a Master Duel opinion into a TCG one, it'll be
So
interesting to
I
talk
just
about.
think I defaulted in that when these cards first came out, I thought the Fire King deck was better. That is what I played at the last event I
Mm-hmm.
played. Like, this is the first event I played in 8 months. I played Fire King at the Vegas 3v3 and the Costa Rica 3v3. And that was the deck that I thought was better at the time. And history showed that was wrong. The pure deck performed head and shoulders miles better than the Fire King versions, all of them, through every format since then, right? Like, the Fire King deck won like the 3v3 won the Vegas 3v3, and then literally every event after that the pure deck just ran away with it. And
Right.
to the point that there were probably some events that maybe no Fire King topped at all, like as the pure deck just got more and more optimized. And I just thought for sure, like, Volcanics wasn't good enough to push the Fire King deck back over the edge. Ash and Poplar getting limited hit both decks equally, more or less. And the Azamina cards were, in my opinion, probably going to make the pure deck even better. And you know what? I guess I will say still too early to tell definitively because this was just the first event, and Fire King won the
Mm-hmm.
first event last time too, and then every subsequent event the pure deck won. But yeah, I just wasn't expecting Fire King to perform as well as it did. And I think it also just could have been that a lot of people who were good played it, which I think is something that
Right.
doesn't really get talked about enough. Is like sometimes when you see like, you know, the same, like when the same very good people do well consistently, it can sometimes be like, oh well, like if Jesse had just played a pure Snake Eyes deck, he probably would have also done well. Like he's just extremely good, right? So him playing the Fire King deck and top aiding with it versus him playing
He
the
topped with
the
Crystal
pure.
Beast.
He topped with Crystal
Yes.
Beast. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is literally just a couple weeks prior he topped with Crystal Beast. So like, you know, do we when we evaluate some of these and we see like, oh, the winner Landon, like he qualified for Worlds this year. It's like, did he do well because of the Fire King deck, or did the Fire King deck do well because of them? Something to think about. Probably both, right? Like obviously, like you can't just play literally anything, but
Right, like, I don't think the
yeah,
Fire King
yeah,
deck is terrible,
yeah,
and like
yes, exactly, exactly.
these are good decks played by good people. So,
Yes.
and then if it's just your day, it's going to be your day. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something we've talked about before. Was like, not only do you have to be good to win a YCS most of the time, but you have to get lucky during this tournament. Every single person who's won a YCS has gotten lucky throughout their tournament. The cards have to fall in your favor through the entire tournament. You don't just win the entire thing because you're great. There is going to be luck involved every single time. Um, so like you said, it could be like, a couple weeks from now when people are optimizing their decks more, the pure deck is just better. Or who knows? Maybe there was 25 Snake Eye in top 32, or is it what this
There's a
is?
lot. I don't think it's quite 25 because there
20
was.
25%. That's what it was.
Oh yeah,
25% was that
yes,
was this,
that's
and then
very.
and 22% was Tenpai. Maybe Tenpai will take over. Maybe I don't know. I think the Tenpai deck is extremely good right now, and I'm not happy about it.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
I think again, this is the first event with the new set, and with it combined with a new Forbidden List, and people's decks will just become more optimized as time goes on. And so we'll see where it goes. I'm not really sure which is better between the pure deck. I have been playing the pure deck more. Uh, I do like that the Fire King deck plays pretty well into Fuwa. You can give your opponent 1 to 2 draws and still have multiple interactions on your opponent's turn, which I think is the huge benefit of playing that deck. Um, but it plays incredibly worse into Perulia. It's like drastically worse, where I don't think you could really do much most of the time when your opponent plays Perulia on you, which is funny. But um, yeah, we can move on to more of this Niagara stuff.
Yeah, so let's go into the top cut breakdown first, I guess. Which something interesting. I want to talk about both the top cut breakdown and also like their placements within the tournament. So 5 Ubel made top 32, 4 of them lost in top 32, which I think that is pretty telling and something that a lot of people. Additionally, 6 Tenpai, five Tenpai top 32, 4 of them lost in top 32, right? And I think that is something that's quite interesting. And then 3 Rescue Ace top 32, all 3 of them lost in top 32. And that is something where you can look at the top cut breakdown and see some of these decks like, oh, like this deck made it, or this deck made it, or look at all these different decks, and then a lot of them just lose instantly. Because
there was also 6 Tenpai, by the way.
6 Tenpai? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe I missed one.
Well, one was in top 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, is there? What, did I miscount this? Is it actually 5?
I think it's 5.
I think one might have been.
It is actually 5. Okay, yeah. I miscounted.
At the time we had the sheet, we had the bracket, and we were going through it all. I think one deck was unaccounted for, but I think it ended up being Tenpai.
Yeah, and then the one Yubel that didn't lose in top 32 lost in top 8, and then the one Tenpai that didn't lose in top 32 lost in top 4, which is, that's, those are both reasonable showings, but I do think it is interesting to just look at like the people in top cut got there because they're prepared for these decks, right? And I'm not gonna go as far as to call Yubel or Tenpai gimmick decks. Like, that's not true. Like, those decks are good. Those decks have done well, but they are probably, compared to the Snake Eye variants, I will say they are like the less stable decks. And I think the people that made top cut were there because they probably had pretty consistent ways to beat Yubel, either to break their field or pretty consistent ways to beat Tenpai Dragon. Like, they had a strategy that they had used throughout the tournament and had done well, whatever. So I think that
coming from like playing a bit more One Piece, I think a lot of those decks tend, especially in like an unknown format, right? Some people pick a comfort choice, right? Like in terms of something like Yubel or Tenpai. And I think those decks tend to be pretty exploitable, and they tend to almost just be skill checks, right? It's sort of like where we're at in this conversation, where it's like a more seasoned player has identified, I can lose to Tenpai, I will deck build appropriately. Like Jeff and Jesse were going over like D-barrier thrust, whatever, right? Like that's sort of like what happens when you make top cut generally, right? Like some things can sort of stray through. But in Swiss, you're not getting the full package. You can afford to lose 2 matches in Swiss, but when you make top cut and you queue into the prepared person, like, you are more than likely going to lose in your tournament, and that's just
I actually have to speak on this exactly. So as I mentioned, this was the first YCS I've entered since February. So I've not played a YCS in 8 months. I have not really played any sort of tournaments. The only experience I have playing against some of these decks has just been when I've just been messing around a Master Duel. Tenpai, I got kind of like a crash course before the tournament because Furman ended up playing Tenpai, so we just kind of jammed games in the hotel lobby for a couple hours, and then he learned what the Centurion deck did, I learned what the Tenpai cards did, and it was whatever. Yubel, especially with the context of the Fiendsmith cards, I had never played a game against previously, and I vaguely knew what was going on, but for sure, when I played against Yubel in Swiss, I just got knowledge checked. Like, and I didn't, and I got destroyed because I stopped, in air quotes, stopped most of what they were doing, and then just died to him crashing 3 monsters into my Chaos Angel from Nightmare Pain. And it's like, oh, like, I knew this was a possibility. I did not know how to navigate around it. I did not know how to stop it from happening. If I had been playing more, could I have done something differently to win this game? Probably. But I didn't, right? And I just got knowledge checked, and I just died to Yubel from them crashing their own monsters into mine. And it's like, is somebody in Top Cut going to lose to that? Probably not, right? Like, they're probably going to have a better idea of what's going on to stop something like that happening, and you're going to have to win, like, a real game. Not to say that, Yubel probably wins like that all the time. Not to say that that's like an exploited bull, like gimmicky, whatever. Like, that's probably just how you win a lot of games in Yubel. But there are ways to avoid it, right? And there are ways to play around it. And it was one of those things where, like, I was looking at it and I was like, I think if I'd made a worse field, I could have just won this game. Because something that ended up happening was my board ended up at some point being like Chaos Angel with the Centurion Synchro Monster. And I used my own trap card my banish phalanx to banish my own monster, so he couldn't crash into it, but then he just crashed into my other monster because he had enough U-bells to do it that way anyway. Like, he needed like one more monster or something. I don't remember the specifics, but it was like there was probably a way I could have won that game, and yeah, I'm sure that people more experienced would have found ways to win it. And I think Tenpai Dragon is kind of the same way. If you look at the Twitter discourse or the social media discourse, I guess I'll say specifically around Tenpai Dragon, a lot of it is just like, haha, like play Raigeki, win game. And yes, sometimes that does happen. And there are definitely some very, very good players that like, they'll play a whole tournament and then haha, top 32, they just get Tenpai God-handed. And like, that's a real thing, but it's not. Tenpai Dragon is not every single game you both compare hands and whoever's hand is better win. Like, that's not what happens, right? And in top 32, the players are going to have a better plan in general against Tenpai and minimize those types of
You also have
interactions.
inherent information given that an entire Swiss tournament has basically completed, and you are now into
You
top
might
cut,
know
right?
your
So,
opponent's
like,
playing Tenpai and you play
yeah,
accordingly. Yes, that is also
yeah.
true.
I mean, that's just like what happens, right? You look at the coverage blog, you talk to your friends, like you have an idea of what you're facing before you even sit down, you know, through completely open means, right? Like
Yeah.
the coverage blog, the streams, everything.
You
You
can just
get
look at
information
talk
on your
tables
opponent.
update.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
no, they've actually gotten better at that. And I think that's a big change for sure. If you look at the top table updates, it actually doesn't identify who is who. Before it would say who it is and
Really?
what deck
I
they were
didn't know they
playing.
changed
Yeah.
that.
Now,
Interesting.
yeah. If you have a look at the coverage blog now, when they do the top table breakdown, it really only talks about the decks in. I think it's like the top 16 tables or the top 32 tables, and then it goes over like a representation of each of those decks in that pool of players. But it doesn't necessarily tell you who's playing what. Obviously, the feature matches will do that, but you know that's unavoidable. If you
Yeah,
want
yeah, yeah.
coverage, that's gonna happen. But they've definitely gotten a lot better. I'll actually like while we do the normal
Yeah.
stuff, I'll have a look and I'll link it to you.
Sure. Yes. I think like the other thing I want to talk about specifically, the top 4 decks of this event were interesting, right? In that Ryan, you playing Sky Striker and Labyrinth making top 4 were not things I had on my bingo sheet.
Yes.
No. I mean, Ryan is what I like to call main protagonist, right? Like Ryan plays what he likes and he plays Yu-Gi-Oh well, right? He lives and
Yeah.
breathes it. However, he is not going to compromise his morals and play a deck that he doesn't like. Like he plays it solely for the fun of the game, and that's why you see him play these unique decks and he does well. And that's not to say he can't play, the same decks as the people that are, winning the tournaments, like the Fire King deck or otherwise. He just chooses not to play them. So I'm glad he did well. I'm not gonna be happy with the people that think Sky Striker is playable. It is a Ryan
Right.
Yu thing. It is not.
Yeah.
It is not a. It is not a Yu-Gi-Oh thing. But
We were in the hotel room after the event, and I was talking to Jesse about Ryan's deck because I was like, "Was there anything different about it?" And he's like, "No, it was basically just our freaking Master Duel deck
Yeah.
made for TCG." And he was like, "I love Ryan and wanted him to win, but he had no business doing that well with
Yeah,
that deck."
Ryan felt the same way, but not even from like the only reason he felt that way is because he thought his deck was he just played it for fun. He likes Sky Striker cards. He played
Yes.
Sky Striker. That is it.
And
And
the
that's how
thing-
Yu-Gi-Oh is meant to be, though, right? Like,
And between the Sky Striker and the Labyrinth deck, I think two things happened. People forgot how to play against the Sky Striker cards. Jesse was telling me that there were seasoned YCS goers playing against Ryan, and some of them were picking up things like Kagari and reading Kagari. And that, I was like, wow, that is unacceptable.
That's crazy.
And so people...
No, I think it's fine to read cards if you haven't seen them for a while, but I don't know, man.
I've seen enough Kagaris to last me a lifetime. I don't know. That one's a little...
But
okay.
if you forget how to play against some of these cards, same with Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a very punishing deck when you don't know how to play around the trap cards, and that's just trap decks in general. And again, that's just something like a huge one that people fuck up against is Daruma Cannon. That card can solo entire decks if you're not playing correctly.
That card's broken. Yeah, that card's crazy.
And Daruma Cannon, really good against the Snake Eye deck, terrible against the Fire King deck, because you can force it so easily and then destroy your cards after they're flip face down.
And that's before you even factor in cards like Witch and all the other stuff as well, right? Like, you have the option,
So, again, like, these two decks, if you're... take a lot of advantage of people who are not as familiar with them. Ryan also,
I think
again,
we've seen that
we already talked about it.
Ryan,
good player. It doesn't matter. Like, Ryan's a good player, and he played a deck he liked, and a lot of people were probably like, "Fuck, I don't know how to interact with these Skyscraper cards," and then just got shit on. But then, like, the finals was not even close. He played against Landon, who is again now a very good player, and just got destroyed when someone knew what they were doing and, you know, had like the good deck on top of it. Sky Striker, again, I think Fire King is like a very bad matchup into Sky Striker. Like, I'm sorry, the Sky Striker deck has a very poor matchup into Fire King. It wasn't even close. So I don't think that Sky Striker or Labyrinth are very good decks right now, compared to like Snake Eye, Tenpai, Fire King, and Yubel. But I think, again, sometimes this is just your day to do well, and your decks can, take advantage of people who are unseasoned or don't know.
I think Lab is a bit more acceptable, as we talked about.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You can.
I agree with you. A lot of the time, decks like Lab do sort of play off your opponent not knowing how to interact with a lot of these cards. And that's the same with a lot of the rogue decks, right? I think Lab is probably a little bit more straightforward now. But I think trap cards in general are things that people tend to not know how to play against in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they aren't things that tend to happen that often with, maybe like the last like 2 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! 3 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! We've seen a lot of decks that don't actually utilize trap cards to the full extent. The one thing I maybe want to look at is like Kashtira playing stuff like Book of Moon and Lance and stuff like that. And I think that was sort of like people's first taste of how those sort of cards function, right? Like, not a hand trap, not like a face-up card that you know what this card does.
First in a long time.
Yeah.
First time in a long time.
Yeah. Obviously not saying it's never been that way, but just in like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Right?
For sure.
And like maybe we stray back to like Eldritch and stuff like that. And I'm sure there's been some decks in between, but like off the top of my head, just like from 2022 to 2023, I feel like it has sort of been unique. A lot of these decks have played face-up, or they have hand traps, and you're sort of just playing, this guessing game. But when traps are thrown into the mix, and there's hand traps, and there's all these other cards, some people's brains just explode, and they don't know how to, factor in every little, micro interaction your opponent can. No, it's macro at that point, but just factoring in all of these like layers and cards they have to be familiar with, and knowing, okay, well, if he has this, I have to do it this way, but if he has this, I have to do it this way, and you sort of just like foundations, right? And that comes with experience.
Yeah, especially with the Labyrinth deck, because there's a lot of little things that people will overlook. So I saw a lot of people activating cards unnecessarily to Labyrinth cards, and then their opponent getting free Ariuses for no reason. And a huge one was, I saw someone, their field was like SP and like some Snake Eye monsters, and their opponent flipped a Daruma Cannon, and he's like, okay, I'll chain SP. And his opponent had Lovely Lady Labyrinth out, so then he's like, you can't chain monster effects to the trap card. So he just played into it thinking he was going to like blink his field and then couldn't, and then lost his entire field basically.
And even stuff like the field spell as well, that's a card I see a lot of people struggle with, because again, it's a unique card. No other deck tends to have cards that change what your card does, right? Add an effect to it.
Yeah, that is a weird one.
You don't acknowledge, like, oh, does this card target? You didn't ask this question. This card's already resolving, my bad. Like,
as it's resolving, pop your thing.
What's that? You resolved a normal trap that isn't a Labyrinth card, and you get to summon back a guy? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Which one thing I do want to touch on as well, that this is something that I've noticed a lot more from playing other games. From playing, like, I've started playing Pokemon recently. I'm playing Universe for a while, where like when you're testing, you pretty much only test into the presumed field, right?
Mhm.
Like, and there are some decks you just don't even want to test against. Like, there will be some times when we're
Yeah.
testing for an event, and then I'll be like, oh, who wants to test? And they'll be like, I don't really want to play against Hawks for 2 hours. And I'm like, you know what? Fair point. Like, I don't want to. Like, I wouldn't want to either. And it's to the point of like, who was going into this event? Like, who? Anyone in the whole world was going into this event and going, hey, I need to test for Niagara. I have this new Snake Eyes Azamina deck. Who wants to play Labyrinth against me for 2 hours?
Mhm.
No one. Literally no one. No, no one
No.
wants to do that, right? And I think that's the type of thing where, as like when Labyrinth was a presumed part of the field, I'm sure people were testing against it and going through these things and figuring out, okay, I can do this and this and this. Labyrinth hasn't been nearly as relevant in the last couple months. Would not shock me if people removed it from their testing rotation entirely, because it's just miserable. Like, it's just miserable to play against, and I feel like a lot of just testing groups just might not, like, if you don't have someone in your testing circle who like is up to date with Labyrinth, you're not going to have a relevant build to test into.
Yeah.
You're not going to have somebody who's particularly good at playing it to test into. It's just going to be a problem. Sky Striker, don't even get everything I just said about Labyrinth times 1,000 for Sky Striker, right? Like, no one will play that deck well, like, who hasn't just been grinding
What's the
it forever.
solution?
Yeah.
What's the solution? The solution is literally what Jeff had been saying. When he enjoys Yu-Gi-Oh, he's played 2 locals this week.
Yeah.
Do you know where you verse decks like Labyrinth and Sky
Locals.
Striker? At your local card store? Playing on Dueling Book, grinding Rated. You'll verse a variety of decks. And like you said, with other card games, I felt that exact way playing One Piece, factoring in specific matchups, right? You have your little pocket, your mulligan guides, all of these, like little intricacies, right? And that happened to me. One of the regionals I played in the last like month or two, I start undefeated. I'm 4-0. I queue into a near auto lose matchup that I wasn't obviously as well versed into, and then another matchup that we didn't really factor in from like a gameplay perspective, but I'm also unfavored against, right? But if I had played against them more often, you find those little things where you gain an edge each and every time, and I guess we can maybe use that to tie into one of your matches at Niagara itself, right? That you told me, you're like, if I had played this enough, I'm 100% winning game 1.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the more experience you have, the more you see the little things. And that comes alongside like matchups. It comes alongside like just having like certain card combinations in your own deck, right? Like that's just I call it like deja vu. I like to say I'm sitting there, I look at my hand and I go, I've been here before.
Yes.
And that's when I know I'm really good at the game at that juncture specifically, because my brain has already interpreted this situation and it's relating it to something immediately, right? Like it's not even intuitive. It's like, this is a complex situation, but I know I've been in this spot before. And that's just where like playing more tends to bring you into that, sort of deja vu, Jesse Cotton, we've all, okay, it's not to call it the Jesse Cotton, not the hockey, is it pronounced? I don't know, anime stuff.
Sure. So
Ruin me.
I equate it to if anybody has played like a good amount of chess, where as you get better and better and better, you recognize board positions in chess, and they all have, and they're all, because generally if a position is a commonly reached one because a series of logical moves has been played, it may have been played in a game before and it's been studied and all the, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of what it feels like in Yu-Gi-Oh, in my opinion, sometimes as well. Not the exact cards, because obviously, like, unlike chess, like, the game pieces in Yu-Gi-Oh change. But, like, you're looking at these 2 cards in your hand that are similar to decks you've played in the past. Your opponent has 1 back row, and the functionality of that back row is similar to the functionality, of like, oh, this is either this, or this. I've literally been here before. I have this option to play around this card. I have this option to play around this card. It's probably this other card. I'm going to play around that one. And a lot of the time, guess what? When you've played Yu-Gi-Oh for a billion hours and you've looked at that and you've identified it, it's probably that 3rd card you said it was. We've had these situations where we've been on call just, playing like Master Duel, and we've just been
We'll
screen
say the most
sharing,
ridiculous
and
stuff.
literally
Calling stuff like Mirror Force is the
yeah,
crazy one.
exactly.
In like
We'll just
2024,
yeah,
calling
we'll just be
Mirror
like, this is like my opponent's like silver 3, like it's probably just Mirror Force. Like I'll put this in defense mode, and then it just is, and we're like, sure, you know.
Yep.
And it is the type of thing. It's literally it's literally like, I think we were talking about this, where like if Yu-Gi-Oh game states had names like chess openings did, if you could like if your opponent T sets and you like, or your opponent T sets, you're like, ah yes, this is the Jones Edison, like that's Raiko,
Oh my
and
God. Yes,
you know,
this
like,
is the caught Terrelement.
yeah, literally
Something dumb like that.
exactly, yeah, exactly, like, you know, it can
Shuffler
just
in the grave, roll
yeah.
Carlos on the board. Yes.
Yes.
All right, we'll find checkmate in 2 moves. It's fine.
Precisely. Yeah, but no, I know what you mean exactly, and there have been like, I've done some like very like baseline research and the baseline research into like things that have studied this, and there is a correlation between like mastery and your ability to like dissect situations like that. What you described is almost exactly like studies they've done about chess players, where you give a novice, somebody who knows nothing about chess, and you show them like a chessboard, and then you ask them to recreate it later. It'll take them a long time to study the board and memorize its positions. If you give somebody who is a chess master a significantly shorter amount of time, they can recreate it almost instantly, because they've been there before. They know logically where the pieces should be, you know, whatever. And same sort of thing for Yu-Gi-Oh, in my opinion. Even though the game pieces change, like the vibe doesn't, right? Like, if that makes sense. You've had similar cards, you've been in similar situations, you've played similar games, and you can almost always equate it to something. It's all pattern recognition, and that's what I think is cool about the design of Yu-Gi-Oh as well, is that when you've played it a lot, you have the ability to parse through it much more quickly. And then, of course, when you play against Sky Striker for the first time in 8 years, now your brain shuts off, as we've described.
Yeah. Or your opponent sets more than an infinite impermanence. Yeah, like something hasn't clicked yet, and you need that refresher.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate sometimes that refresher is in top cut of a YCS.
Yes.
Like I guess, okay, to not go too much deeper, we got through the 2 rogue decks in top 4, right?
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the main decks in top 4, I guess?
Yeah, the Tenpai deck. I actually haven't looked at this exact build. Oh right, so this Tenpai deck didn't main 6 Molchamis. It only mained 3, but it did main 3. It did main 3 Impulse, which I think Impulse is a card that I also underestimated its playability in.
The one thing that I've seen a lot of people actually not be too happy with is how limiting Impulse is for some of the rogue strategies, right? Like, your branded deck now is inherently worse because you just have 6 copies of Ash Blossom, but you also have one that doesn't lose to Call by, and now you have to play Impulse in your deck with Crossout. Like, you actually have, you know what I mean? Like, some of these decks now, not invalidated. Yeah, like you said, the lottery. Like, do they have Impulse? Yes, no.
Well, no, more so like, does your bad rogue deck happen to have light monsters? Guess you can't play Impulse.
Yeah. That's well. we had this conversation. It was like, what was it? It was like the Chimera deck or something, right? Maybe I don't know. Someone. I don't know. Anyway, it was just like looking at these. Like, there was another crazy one where the kids at locals were talking about the Mimigul stuff. And how if your opponent activates Impulse from hand once, the Mimigul cards are actually unplayable. They do not work. And that's
sad.
Hilarious.
Yeah, that is really funny.
It's such a design overlook, in my opinion. Just knowing that these cards exist, but obviously, like, that's the same thing as like queuing into the back row deck when your deck has no back row removal, right? Yeah. You sort of just play the percentages, and sometimes they won't have Impulse with your rogue Mimigul deck. It's not ideal, but yeah. I think Impulse just being that card currently and restricting a lot of the rogue decks also sort of removes the need for siding additional cards to cover those rogue decks, right? Like, not to say that they're decks you should ignore, But there's been some spots in the last, couple years where I've looked at decks like Branded, and I don't think Branded is a bad deck by any means. I think Branded is a very powerful deck. It does something very unfair, and it does it really efficiently. But it's it's like sort of weak to most, if not all, like forms of interaction. So you really have to compensate. You really have to work for wins. And I think like we've seen some top players pick decks like Branded as like medicals, and now just having a card like Impulse that is just going to be a mainstay does not let you pick decks like Branded as a medical ever again, right? Until it's just completely out of the main deck and the side deck entirely, or just banned.
Yeah,
I think you just
now
cannot pick
Ash-
those decks as medicals.
Ash on Branded Fusion, and then you make a Scuffed Field to try and hit your opponent with Puppet on your opponent's turn, and then
Yeah, you draw Impulse as a 6
the
card.
Impulse just hits the Sanctifier where no other card can really do that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And don't get me started, you pair it with Infinite Impermanence. My
Oh
goodness.
yeah, then you pop a card too.
Oh yeah, just
Yeah.
it's like,
Whoops.
it's awkward. But
Yeah.
I think this Tenpai deck is as standard as it can get. It's nothing like particularly unique, but I agree. I think not seeing the 6 chummies is interesting.
Well, I don't know what
he
deck
went
list
for like
we're
a
looking
broader.
at with this guy that I'm looking at. It says there was 2 Fuwas and 1 Perulia.
That is what I'm. Yes, that is what this deck I'm looking
I don't
at.
know
I
if
am
this is a
looking at the
mistake.
official Konami list, and he has 3 Fua. And
Okay,
no
so this is just
Okay.
a mistake.
Okay, this
as
is
a photo.
very good. Okay, this is just a mistake in the photo. Yeah. Okay, so the official one is that.
I
on-
mean,
is that on the
well,
coverage
in the
side?
deck, I mean, the coverage one could be incorrect as well. Who's to say,
Fair
right? It
enough.
is on the coverage side. It's in the chat if you want to check it
True.
real quick.
Yeah, let me see if I can find. That's true.
Because I gotta tell you,
guess
if there's anyone that I can trust, it would be Anthony Ticella writing the deck list, because he also writes the TCG player articles going over the deck list after the event. So if
Yeah.
anyone has access to these lists right in front of him, I would
That's
trust
probably...
him. Anything else, but
Yeah. Let me see. YCS Niagara Falls top 4 deck list. Tenpai. 3. Wait. No, wrong one. Tenpai. 3 Marchami Fool Us. Yeah, okay. So
yep.
the
And
image
then
that we were
he
looking
played
at.
he played no Perillia.
No Perulia.
based
Okay.
on what I've
That
seen.
makes
Yeah, yeah.
so much more sense than the image that Jeff and I were looking at.
Yes.
That said
Sure.
2 Fua, 1 Perulia. That made no sense at all. Okay. 3 Fua, that makes so much more sense. Excellent.
So what? Here's a quick funny thing, just to get this one out of the way.
Mhm.
From my understanding is a lot of the people that did do well with Fua, they borrowed Fua.
Yeah.
And then for their deck profile, some of them either didn't put it in the profile. So some of these people that scrape the like, I think Milano
Yeah.
only had 1 in his deck profile, and I think people just scraped the deck list like quite quickly. But Milano played 3, and he
yeah,
borrowed
yeah.
2.
He
So maybe it's the case here. He had 2, he borrowed 1, and they used a Perillia as a placeholder. That's that's what clicks in my brain, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Very possibly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, Fu is a card that we talked about already a while, so is Dominus Impulse. And then one thing we didn't quite talk about, maybe one of us said it like offhand. Both of those cards are very, very good in Tenpai. Not shocking that a Tenpai made it quite deep in the tournament. Most of them lost top 32.
This person also topped Lil, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've been traveling. They're also like a prominent dueling book grinder as well.
Yeah.
And I think all they play is Tenpai. So it doesn't surprise me. Again, it's it's a deck that they like. They've stuck with it, and they've seen results. Like, it's completely standard. I don't agree with some of their ratios, but clearly they've played more Tenpai games than I have. I'm only
I thought the ratio, some of the
theory,
ratios, like 2 Regeki, 2 Droplet was a little bit weird, but again, I am not a Tenpai player, so
like accommodating to stick to 40 cards so you draw your powerful like new cards now, whereas before when we were playing Tenpai we had more cards like the Kashtira cards, like pre-info, right? There was like the Kashtira cards, Pot of Desires, you had cards like Super Poly, and I think that was sort of like where I wanted to be at with Tenpai specifically. Then you get into like info format and you see the deck list change up again, and like just more sort of focused on clearing the boards that aren't, putting up any crazy negates. I think this is just more to be well-rounded and stick to 40 and draw your Mulchamis and your Impulses. And maybe that's something we can also look at, right? Like how many decks went over 40 cards? Like did you go over 40, Jeff?
Yeah, Ryan, you played 43?
Sadly,
well, Ryan, you doesn't count. Oh, well, Ryan
Oh,
Levine. I know.
did you mean me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah,
Right?
me.
You played 40. How many did you play?
Ignore that one.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Okay, I played. My deck was unfortunately 44 cards, not on
Okay.
purpose. It was just the deck list had to be submitted, and we had a deck, and then we added all the. Oh, I guess I haven't talked about my deck, which we'll get to in a second, but I guess we'll get to it now that you're asking me how many cards are in my deck.
What was I say? My deck
Yeah.
was 42 cards. Jesse's deck was 42 cards. Ryan's, I guess, was
Maybe
44.
Tenpai is like not even unique in this process, but Tenpai does one thing and it just aims to do it as well as possible, right? Whereas like the Snake Eye Azamina deck, the Snake Eye Fire King Azamina deck, and the Bestial Centurion deck, they sort of try to do different things at some points and try to compensate for some weaknesses with non-engine, right? Whereas like Tenpai engine is kind of small, it's condensed, it's not a lot of 2-card combinations. So maybe that's why like that deck is more prone to go to 40. Now like the good cards have consolidated into your Impulse, into your Mulchami, right? Compared to before where it's like your good cards had to be spread to cover more matchups, more decks, and do things that now one card sort of just like compensates for. Maybe that's a way to look at it for Tenpai specifically.
I'm not going to claim to know.
I think maybe some people just play 40
yeah.
cards in their deck.
I think well, I have Joey. I have okay. Well, to be fair, Landon won with 42 as well.
Yeah,
But
I know.
that's
I'm just.
But
Yeah.
like when we're playing Master Duel, we want to get close enough to 40, so we draw Max C, right? Like that's like the whole idea. But I guess the amount of games where you're going first and drawing for Wallace doesn't actually achieve anything makes it sort of, like redundant. Like drawing Max C going first in Master Duel, obviously insane. It does something, right? Drawing for Wallace going first in TCG doesn't really give you that much more of an edge. So maybe trying to like offset, some of the cards just functioning the same, adding more cards, diluting it, and just making it a little bit more reasonable into more matchups. That's what's happening, maybe. Or people are just playing 40. I play 41 for fun sometimes. Like I know it. I'm trying to dig deeper and give people more credit, right? You're all intelligent.
Yeah.
let me find something that isn't there, maybe.
Yeah. I wish I'd played fewer cards in my deck, which I guess real quick I'll talk about, because I guess we can talk about Pax deck or the Centurion deck in general real quick.
But before we move on to that, I'm going to start talking about the winner's deck, the Fire King deck.
That,
and then,
yeah.
So with Landon's deck, the things that... so Fire King was one of the decks I was considering. But I was and I love the Fire King cards way more than I do the like Snake Eye cards. So I really wanted to use it, but the one thing we're trying to build the deck is I couldn't fit as much non-engine, which is what the pure Snake Eye deck has always excelled at. It could always fit more non-engine and was able to just like combat the Fire King deck much easier. And so when Jesse was like, I'm just going to run Fire King, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how you're going to fit all the good non-engine you're going to want to play to combat all your opponent's decks. And so I played my deck, he played his deck, and Jesse played like 3 Kieran, 3 Volcanics. It was very close to like a Master Duel style deck with the addition of like Dominus, Impulse. He played 1 Witch, 3 Deception, which is different from Landon. Again, we had 2 Kieran, 2 Volcanics, 3 Diabellstar, 2 Deception. I think that's a bit odd, but I think in general, this deck is pretty...
Well, he also went with what? Like the 3 Impum versus the Jesse single Impum, right? Like that's just where...
Did Jesse only play 1 Imperm?
Whatever list I have that Jesse sent me, it was like 1 Droll, 1 Witch, 1 Impum.
No, it should be 1 Effect Veiler. Jesse played.
Oh no, it's still 1 Veiler. It's 1 Veiler, 1 Droll, 1 Witch, 1
it is
Impum.
still 1 Imperm. Okay, that's crazy. I don't know why Jesse did this. So after the event, I was talking to Jesse about how he side decked, and he's like, "Oh, I just winged it," and I was like, "Okay, whatever. You're a goat, I guess." And then I was talking about how did you win going second so much? And he goes, the format is not as crazy as you think. And I was like, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe I don't have to use as much non-engine to combat crazy fields. He's like, maybe I'm just so conditioned to like Appaloosa and all this other shit that I was just too scared to pull the trigger on the Fire King deck and risk not using as much non-engine as I've been comfortable with the pure deck, where I can run like 18 hand traps and feel pretty good about going second. So I think that's something to think about in the future. Maybe the format is not as crazy as I think it is. I thought it was.
I think Appaloosa has just traumatized us. Like,
yeah, maybe
Appaloosa, I think, like, whenever people were talking about their boards and we're like, yeah, this is a 10 negate board, and they counted Appaloosa as like 4 of them, and we're always kind of like, okay, that's not really true because, like, you know, yada yada yada. Like, when you have all engine, Appaloosa is 4 negates. Like, that's just true. When you have a bunch of non-engine, obviously Appaloosa is like get impermed. Now it traded with 1 card. So when Appaloosa exists, I think non-engine becomes way more important, because just the Appaloosa sticking and being 3 to 4, like usually it's going to be 3, I'd say, like on average. It's very rarely that someone make a 4 material Appaloosa, but I'd say 3 is a reasonable one. That someone's making a 3 material, Appaloosa, like you're not going to be playing through that like with your engine, like it's just on top of everything else, right? But yeah, that is something that I also hadn't really considered, is that now finally there's no Baron, there's no Savage, there's no Appaloosa. Like, can we just play through fields again? Like, is that has counterplay returned? Like, can we just go second, and then your opponent's playing a U-Bell deck and makes 11 negates, and you
right?
Go,
That's the thing. It's just basically just a U-Bell deck that actually has all the negates and interruptions.
Yeah.
But then what I'm looking at Jesse's deck right now. Okay, I kind of fucking hate Jesse's deck, and I quite like Landon's more. I like his ratios more. Jesse's literally just the GOAT. I actually don't like a lot of this at all. But
but we knew going into this event that Jesse wants to do well, but I think Jesse will definitely phone it in a little bit more now that he is guaranteed going back to Worlds, right? Like, that's obviously, he did still win Sacramento, but you and I both know Jesse does tend to get a bit lazy and sort of just cruise on his notoriety.
Leading up to the event, Jesse was like, "All right, we're gonna test Jeff," and then we played and then we played for a couple hours one day. And
we
then
were
never
there,
again.
we were watching, and I never saw you guys test again.
I was like, okay, cool, I guess.
Okay.
So yeah, 100%. Same with Ryan though. Ryan was like, Jeff, I really want to do well, and then we played talked about Yu-Gi-Oh for one day, and then Ryan went to go play My Hero.
Then I went to play my Hero event. Yeah, sorry, my bad. Hopefully,
I think
at least Anaheim isn't a week after a Universes event this time. For once, it's not a week after a Universes event, and I can actually just play Yu-Gi-Oh. Okay.
You just wait until Jeff gets me where I'm fresh off my YCS Sydney win. As a teammate. Yeah. Anyway, the one thing I really like, I don't know if you touched on this, I sort of zoned out for a second because my brain is spaghetti at 3 a.m. I do like the zombie vampire in Landon's deck, and that was something.
I definitely don't. I don't really get it at all, I'm gonna be honest.
So what it does is when you only open access to the Fire King engine, you have the option to enter the Snake Eye portion of your deck.
That's what I thought, but I think the Fire King cards are just good enough to where like it just does not matter.
I agree, but some hands can be they're not necessarily like weak, but you can really only set up like one point of interaction. You might get hand trapped on something awkwardly. And just having the option to zombie vampire as like a reroll into the other part of your deck is pretty decent. You don't like default or prioritize to it, but it can come up. It's just another like option. There was something the guys were saying yesterday, and I got really mad. They call it reverse lines, and I said that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I'm just reading what they're saying, and it's just like, yeah, the reverse line is you have the Fire King engine, and then you turn into zombie vampire and mill.
And then you try to like swarm your way into
quite literally stuff. Yes. Yeah.
And then you don't. And
it could be your opponent's Ash, Jeff. It could be your opponent's Ash. That is
it could be.
Or your opponent's Diabell Star. It actually
that is another one.
When you play a mirror, there's actually like you get essentially 8 mills, because 4 from your deck, 4 from their deck to hit Diabell Star, Ash, Poplar, Oak, even like Oak, bring back their Oak or your Oak, and then sack off your own zombie vampire and Oak and go in that.
Well, like at that point, you might have found Ponix as well. It's like another consideration. You get the extra body. My other concern is like I don't know what the extra bodies are necessarily doing here, but I guess like when you get into like maybe zombie vampire milling, which is more relevant with the Azamina stuff now, right? Is that sort of a thing? Like,
Sort of.
Yeah,
if we can get into that part of the
I guess
engine,
if
yeah.
you don't open one of your 8 copies of Witch, yes, you could
It
just.
can happen. It can happen, little bro. I don't know what to tell you.
But yes,
Yeah.
I understand this logic of wanting Snake Eye cards when you don't have them.
Yeah,
But
because like
From your opponent's deck is the most compelling one for me. I think that's like pretty
well,
reasonable.
so what? Jesse played the Garunix and the Photon. Landon played the Garunix. Okay, so he swapped
you have to play the
Photon
Garunix.
for the,
Jesse has played the
yeah,
Photon Lord, which is a very Master Duel thing.
Yeah, I had that in my deck for most of the duelist stuff. We'll get into that later or whatever. But I did find myself just not ever needing cards like that, right? Like you're either getting Fualos early, in which case you're just giving them a bunch of free cards. Well, not so much in this deck, but you're giving them cards if you try and like play that card, and it doesn't actually add anything to your end board. Is my biggest concern. So it doesn't actually like help. You know? Like it's not a negate for any card like evenly match or stuff like that. Like just cards that sort of like they don't necessarily line up well, but if you sort of play a bit broader into their the end of your turn and your opponent just has like a card like evenly, like a card like the Photon Lord isn't doing anything, it doesn't necessarily stop anything on your opponent's end that your end board already wouldn't stop. Maybe the default and the theory is just like we don't have Apo, I want to have a monster negate, and this is probably the best one. And it can also just have this like weird issue where it sort of locks your big Garunix, but some of the lines I think but some of the lines I think you're able to get away with making the Volcanics a level 8 and just overlaying with that plus like a Kieran, or you have this like weird combination of cards where you get to access the idiot Garunix. We have another name for it, but I don't think it's PG friendly. And yeah, so like you just get to use that and like an Volcanics that's already floating and sort of turn those into just like not vampire. Well, like you can turn it into vampire, but turn it into the Photon Lord and then do all your normal stuff without a normal summon. If you open, it's like Kieran Volcanic something. I don't remember. It's like some weird like 3 or 4 card combination where like the Photon Lord is obviously the best one because you've got everything and and a nice fresh crisp can of Coke Zero as well. Like it's just all there for you, and this is just adding an extra layer to a deck that's already layered. But I think I like Zombie Vampire more just to get into the other powerful part of my deck. So I like this list. I agree. I like this list a lot more. Sideboard, I haven't played enough of current to really give too much input. I think Retaliating Sea is a unique one. Did you side deck Retaliating Sea, Ryan and Jeff?
I wish I had, but I didn't. But I wish I had.
I did not,
I think
but I don't know if
Ryan's
would
deck
have
specifically,
mattered.
right, would have been pretty reasonable because like that's just that's a decent enough card in your deck, right? Because it lets you.
No, it's fine. You can still all of his synchros are basically generic, so you can just synchro with it and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean. It's like I know that deck. Well, it did play Shifted, but it's like pretty decent into Shifted. But I think like Retaliating Sea just like being
I have a full thing about Shifter. When we get to Centurion, I'm just gonna do a little teeny bit, but.
Well, I mean, like, is there anything else you want to touch on with this deck list? I think it's like pretty standard, and like a good player played a good deck. Like, I think he did what we expected.
I think Jesse is adamant on 3 Volcanics. Landon played 2. I think that just goes back to the whole engine versus non-engine finding space thing. That we'll see where that ends up, right? Like 2 Kieran, 2 Volcanics versus 3 Kieran, 3 Volcanics.
Do you think like maybe if Fire King becomes the standard, we see people just going heavier on like the Fire King engine? Because I feel like that sort of lines up a bit better into the mirror match when we have access to more copies of Kieran, right? Like more copies of Kieran. Maybe Volcanics is sort of relevant in that thing. Again, only from a Master Duel brain. I think like maxing out on cards like that definitely skews that matchup more in favor of the person that's maxing out those cards.
Yeah,
those cards function quite well, but no.
All right,
I don't know. You want to get into Centurion?
Yeah.
Affirming.
Yeah. So I did end up playing Centurion. My deck was I'm not gonna say super different from PAX, but I will talk about the differences. And upon reflection, his is better. I'll just say that like pretty definitively. This was a decision I made super early. I think Jeff and I were talking about decks to play, and Jeff brought up Centurion, and I was like, oh, this deck looks cool. I started playing it. I started playing it on Master Duel just to like learn the basics. That's what I played a lot of the Duelist cover. That's what kind of got me back into Master Duel. It's just like I want to play it. It is a worse version because it doesn't have the new cards. It doesn't have the last 2 waves of support. Actually, it has Auxilla, but it does not have Autry, and it does not have obviously the new level 8 synchro monster, Primera Primus. But I was playing it there and I was enjoying it, and then started playing it with the new support, and it's much stronger and stuff like that. And the decision making that we made when building my deck for the event was, or the logic that we had was, okay, if I'm discarding a card with stand up Centurion to do all of my combos, I can just main the Mulcharmies, because if I draw them, I can just discard them for Centurion, stand up Centurion, and then going second, they'll obviously be very, very strong, and then we'll go from there. And Pack did not main any of them. He sided all of them, and he has a deck profile where he briefly explains most of his reasoning for that. But I want to go into a little bit more in depth why I think he's right. I mean, like, he explained it, but I have some more like hard numbers, I guess, about it. So something that I didn't consider, and this is kind of how I've built other decks that function similarly, is this deck draws a lot of cards during its combos. So you will draw off of Autry, you will sometimes draw off of Legacia, the other level 12 synchro, and if you opened with Lubellion, you will sometimes draw off of Branded Regain. And if you don't draw off Branded Regain on your turn, you are 100% going to draw off Branded Regain on their turn, and you're also probably going to draw off of Autry on their turn, and sometimes you'll draw off Legacia on their turn. So you are drawing between 2 and 6 cards between the 2 turn cycles. Drawing 6 cards between your turn and their turn is crazy. That is a ridiculous number of cards to draw. And when I compare it to other decks I've played that have drawn cards on my opponent's turn cycle, like Live Twin or Vanquish Soul, stuff like that, I've always skewed towards more hand traps that you can draw into that are playable. And the Mulcharmies don't do that. And I think that was my biggest deck building mistake of this weekend. It's just drawing a bunch of cards, and then sure, my Centurion discards a Mulcharmy Fua, and then I play. Then I draw 4 cards between my turn and their turn, and I draw more Charmies that I can't activate. And then my opponent hand trapped me or did something, or had maybe like a breaker like Droplet, or just something that made it so my combo wasn't uninterrupted. And then now I just have a bunch of cards in hand I literally cannot activate, and then I die. Or something like that, right? Or I get hand trapped on my turn, I have a Charmy in my hand, or a Mulcharmy instead of an actual hand trap, and then I die, etc. I built Pack's deck, like I built it and then started just like drawing hands with it, and then I went through a combo, and when you do the turn 1 combo, before, at the very end, you start drawing cards. Before I drew cards, I picked up my deck and just counted the engine versus non-engine. And after your whole combo and you remove all the cards from your deck with your engine, like you remove Gargoyle, Autry, a Trudea, a Primera, a Stand-Up, an Emblema, a Trap card, a Wake Up, you've Lubellion for a Bistro, you take Branded Regained out of your deck, you remove like 10 cards out of your deck. Your deck is like 26 to 28 cards, depending on what you've done. And then you're about to draw 2 to 6 cards, depending on what combo you did. On average, you're going to draw, I think there's like 28 cards in your deck, and like 16 of them are hand traps on average. Like live cards. Ogre, Veiler, Ash, Nib, Mourner, Bistrels. And when you draw that many cards, on average, like 2/3 of the cards you're drawing are just going to be live hand traps. So that's really significant. And I think that was just my fundamental error in deck building, was just not taking into account how many cards you're drawing and the desire to make them be live cards. So I think his deck was built very well. I think this deck was very well positioned for this tournament. And sadly, I think this deck will be unplayable in December when Crossover Breakers comes out. Because I think this deck cannot go second into Rizal. But that will be a discussion for another time. For now, like for the current format, if you have regionals, if you have locals you're playing, OTS championships, whatever, I think this Centurion deck is very reasonable. Like it's just very good. I think it matches up pretty well into most of the decks right now, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I would recommend watching Pack's deck profile to get an idea, and then take into account the things I've said, and maybe make your own adjustments if you don't like the list exactly. But I do think that this deck is very, very reasonable and doesn't main Fua. So if that's another concern, we haven't really talked about how expensive Fua is. If you do not own Fuas, this is a perfectly reasonable deck to play, to not have to worry about that. And all the Centurions just got reprinted. I think if you just don't play, like, all the expensive cards in this deck just got reprinted. So this deck is probably pretty cheap to make if you cut out the Mulcharmies from the side deck and just play something else. I think this is probably as close to a budget deck as you'll get this format, honestly. Like, literally everything was just in the tins or last year's tins, and everything has a reprint. So, recommend it a lot. I like this deck. So that's all I got on Centurion.
Obviously, if you want to go deeper or get some shortcuts, like, there is obviously coaching, spreadsheet, whatever as well.
Mm-hmm.
The option is there if you really want to deep dive it. So, like we said before, there's a lot of depth to current format, right? This is like a deck that was obviously underexplored, and you Pack and I don't want to say you Pack and Jeff, because obviously you came to them independently, but it's like coming to these conclusions independently as just good players. It's always nice, especially for a rogue strategy. Just shows that there's still room for innovation in modern Yu-Gi-Oh.
And then last thing to touch about for Niagara is there was some new prizing, and a lot of people. This has been maybe the biggest hot topic of Yu-Gi-Oh the last couple months, other than card prices, has been why are the prizes so awful? And the prizing was pretty much like unannounced. Like, we even right before recording this went to the
so before Niagara. So it was unannounced, but at Lille and I think at Chile, right? Like,
some of it was there.
Yeah, some of it was like not all of it, but there were talks of, hey, there's additional prizing. Some of the people that did well had to fill out a form. I know people got the dice at Lille, I believe.
Yeah, so there's new top cut dice.
I was like, so for top 32, now you get
the dice are for Chile. They got them. Never mind. Go ahead.
For you get YCS sleeves now. They say YCS on them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The sleeves we saw at Lille. Okay, sorry. Go on.
Yep. For top 16, you now get a card display case,
which was really weird.
That is the worst thing, because they are very big, and if you are traveling, you cannot take them with you.
Yes.
People were scrambling to try to get rid of them because they could not take them home if they lived out of the country.
My one concern with the card case specifically is, like, it would have been cool, except what was it, Distro sending it to stores, or was it Konami?
Yes, my store has those. They gave me one.
Yeah. So they have the exact same again, like so it's a frame. It can hold individual cards, and it has a little placard in the middle. It's not a placard. I'm investigating what it actually is, just to be sure, but no one wants to open it. That I know that has
literally no one wants to open it.
No one, everyone that I've asked it, they do not want to open it, and I feel awful because I think it's really cool and unique. But I want to know what they've done to sort of make this unique and not something that I can, because people have said I can go down to my local Hobby Lobby or equivalent and basically get this thing made one for one, right? And that's the downside about stuff like this. Unique prizing for a YCS is awesome, and I like what they did. They put the effort in. I think this could have been done a little bit better, and maybe had more special feel to it. I saw some people saying, "Oh, you don't even get cards in it." I think that one's a bit of a reach. I don't think you need to have cards in it to be good prizing.
I agree.
What I think could happen is there could be something unique associated with that. I don't know what it is. Maybe something similar to like a playmat vibe, where like there's a unique background for it that's related to the YCS itself. I'm not sure. Something that you can't just replicate as an individual, because this is like the simplest thing to replicate if you really want to do it. Or you could just buy the one that your store got, which is available on eBay for $35, and the only difference is YCS versus the Yu-Gi-Oh logo.
Allegedly,
right?
they are being sent little placards that say what event it was from. They didn't have those
on
site.
I like that.
But allegedly, that is what I've been told, is that because
someone said you put the cards in there that you did well with, right? And I think that's a really cool, unique thing. That's something maybe for future prizing they can consider this. Let's say for the World Championship, if you make top 8, this is additional prizing that they give you. Let's say you do this for TCG. They give you that, and they have the unique cards that we've all been clamoring for, the stamped cards, the alternate rarities. But let's say it's just on a production sheet and it's framed and it says YCS. You don't have to print the actual card. You just have essentially the picture. the uncut sheet, so
Yeah.
if you will, of your unique deck that you did well with, and that would be really cool. Obviously, it's not something that's viable for a YCS, given that there's multiple of them and it's top 16 pricing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the placard identifying what event it is, I think that is good. I
All in
didn't know
all-
that, and that gives me a lot more hope for this.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
like that a lot. I
Yeah.
like that a lot. Yeah,
All in
that's really
all,
cool.
new pricing is cool. Having it be something you can't travel with is a little baffling, considering
that is unfortunate.
considering how people generally have to travel to YCSs. Like not being able
Well,
to
like
travel with it is
giant
just
card's already
crazy.
restrictive, right? Like
Yeah,
a lot of people when they win their giant card, you know,
They
it'll
have
end
to.
up with
They
with
try to sell it immediately because they have to because they can't.
like
they
they'll
can't
go to the
transport
vendor
it.
booth. Like you've been working the vendor booth and you see people win the giant card, they come up and ask you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you are driving and have a car, you cannot.
You literally cannot
like,
take them
I
back.
think-
Yeah.
So it's funny though, because in Europe, Konami actually ships you the giant card if you win it.
Well,
Funny stuff, right? Yeah, crazy.
yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Anyway, I'll move on
Yeah,
to
sorry.
top eight
We'll
pricing
get,
now.
yeah, get the dice,
the
right?
dice.
Okay, so what they started at the Ultimate Duelist Championship finale thing that Jesse and I and other people played in. They gave us metal
There's two
dice,
sets, right?
and we
There
got
was one unique to the UDS and one unique to
we
everyone
have
else.
a black one. They have a metallic case. That's a magnet case. They're small and they actually are quite cool. For us, they gave us official UDS ones that are black, and then we have 25th anniversary Yu-Gi-Oh ones that are red. I like those ones quite a bit more.
Yeah, I'm
so
surprised
now,
they didn't switch it, given the playmat was a black rose playmat that was just red, right?
that is,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's funny.
So now for top 8, you also get YCS dice. It seems there might be different colors depending on your region.
I think no, Jeff. Do you know what I think? I think it might actually be related to the event because I did some investigating. I don't think Europe had the dice on hand. They had the sleeves, but I think the color might differentiate based on if it's a team event or not. Because Chile gave out green ones, and they might have been for the for the team event.
Well,
because they also had team event branded sleeves as well.
I think that also Cancun got green, which is why I think it might be a region.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think I just neglected Cancun even happening.
But I am colorblind, so don't. I could be wrong. So I think that if I could be wrong. It seems like if this is what I think is correct, North America, like U.S. Canada, gets a slate/dark gray. Dice South America area looks like they are green.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Europe if Europe has their own.
Well, Worlds also had unique dice as well, and
they did. They also got red ones. Europe, the Worlds ones were also red, which was again kind of.
No, I think they got the 25th anniversary ones, and they got unique World ones that might have been purple. I might be reaching at that
purple,
point.
Yes,
but
no. They are purple because I have Rays. He was gonna.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay. So they got both. So I think the red ones that say 25th, those are not exclusive to anything specific. They might have been given out. Well, I think they've been given out to like content creators as well, right? So it's like one of those.
It was
like
anyone who participated in the Ultimate UDS Championship thing. So it was
well,
like
no, they got them at Worlds as well. The red ones.
Yes. So I'm saying it was anyone who participated in that. So it was the Master Duelist, the Ultimate Duelist, and the what is the other game that people play?
Duel Links.
What is the other? Duel Links. Yeah, Duel Links. And then you got them, the people who went to Worlds and the content creators at Worlds. So it was anyone from those two events. So the UDS.
I think they will probably give those out more often than not when it comes to special occasions.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I feel like that would be the generic, like marker one that you'll see more often than not. They won't be like general release item. It'll still be unique and rare enough. But I think you'll see more of, maybe not more of those than the YCS ones, but I think you'll see those more than the Worlds ones or the UDS ones especially.
So the thing that I find annoying about this is that also with the dice being in top 8, is that top 8 also now gets a Steam Deck, which is great that it's not a Switch. However, I think it's annoying that the exclusive pricing gets two things in top 8, where it's the dice and the Steam Deck. I think top 8 probably should have been the Steam Deck, and top 4 gets the dice to make the dice a little bit more exclusive.
Okay
It,
with that.
it,
I like that.
it increases like the value of it, and there's like a differentiation in pricing between top 8 and top 4 more, because and it also makes it better for whoever gets 4th place, because whoever gets 4th place just gets fucked because they don't get a prize card, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
I
fourth is the
so
same as 8th place,
so
right? That's
so
the way to look at it every
I'm
single
gonna
time.
say I think it's okay for the dice to be a little more generous, but I do agree there should be something for getting 4th. Like getting 4th versus 8th, you should get something. I don't know what that could be, but it should be something. Like it is crazy that getting 4th is the same as losing in top 8. Like that is actually
Yeah.
crazy.
I mean,
There's
you could
one-
also like rub some salt in the wound and say, "Hey, you didn't get a prize card, but here's this medium card or something."
Here's free entry to the next YCS. The one thing again,
Here's
one
a
thing I
pack
want
of
to touch
gum.
on,
I don't care. Like anything.
Oh lord. Well, you could. Well, what about that? We go back to the ARG one. Remember when Jim had the playmat for 33rd place? What if we have sleeves that say 4th place YCS? How about that? No, I'm leaning like more towards the Jeff train of thought, and I talked to you guys about this when it came to just like revamping all of organized play. That I might go over at some point. I just need to be a little bit more concise with writing out how I want to do it, but making pricing feel unique, but also not saturating the market with said pricing as well to keep the value
Yes.
of that item up, right? And I think dice, and obviously the frame and the sleeves especially, we're gonna see maybe this fatigue that we saw with playmats, maybe not to the same
100%.
extent. Because obviously sleeves are sleeves, right? They're usable
So it's the
multiple
same
different
thing with
times,
kind
right?
of like not only just sleeves and playmats. Most people will, once you have the same thing with like tokens or field centers.
Once you have one that you like, you
Once
tend
they
to
have
not
one,
trend
you
to
do
something
not
else.
change it.
Yeah.
Same with the playmat. Like you'll maybe switch between like maybe two. I don't know anyone who switches between like more than 2 or 3 playmats ever. But once you have dice you like, you usually just keep the dice you like, and it's really, again, that I think that fatigue will set in.
I think
very,
sleeves
very
have a little
quickly.
bit more longevity, especially if they maybe
I changed my sleeves a lot. Like right now, I have like Dia Bellstar sleeves and like my Ultimate Duelist UDS Special 25th Anniversary
I also
sleeves.
think the market for people looking for cool, unique sleeves, especially, is probably a lot broader than people who are like, I need a new playmat, right? Because like functionality wise, like you can have multiple decks, but even if you have multiple decks, you don't need multiple playmats, right? Like that's sort of where we're at.
You're constantly changing sleeves,
Yeah.
so I think it's fine.
And
to have different
I'm
colors,
okay with
different
that. I like
sleeves.
that. Yeah. So I think as long as they have a seasonal differentiation between the sleeves, keeps it unique, keeps it fresh, and also keeps the sleeves from a prior season at like they're commanding a price, right? Like they're not just being flooded into the market. They're not just going to be worth nothing. And we saw that with the WCQ sleeves. They're unique each and every season, and I think that's a really cool thing. And I hope that they put that into the YCS sleeves, especially. Give it a year from now.
Oh,
again,
if a year from now they're the
just be wrong.
same. If a year from now they're the same sleeves again, these will be worth nothing.
We will be sick. Yes.
Oh my god.
And we saw it. We saw it with like the judge sleeves as well, right? It's like the DMG night sleeves. I think people had a lot more. It took a while before they rotated out for the Black Rose ones, from what I remember. Because that was when I started judging.
I think the black
versus,
hieroglyphic
now.
sleeves are still worth a decent bit because those were a little bit
Yeah.
less distributed.
It was like like the tail end of COVID, right? Or like still during COVID when that sort of happened. Yeah. So again, like Jeff said, I think keeping stuff as unique as possible, not necessarily gatekeeping items, but like keeping some value for the prizing that you win. And that compensates for not giving cash or giving additional prizing, like prize cards and stuff like that. That's not to say that they can get away with not doing that sort of stuff, but it's natural, natural progression from here is like they're receptive, they've given us extra stuff. Well, who's to say that the next step is just not giving us prize cards, like the top 32 prize cards or something, like stamped cards, whatever we've talked about, whatever people have been screaming about for the last 10 years or something.
Yeah.
Who's to say that won't be the next step? And it could just be a gradual progression, because we saw the medium card be given to first place after Swiss of the prize card, right? And that was something that came sort of out of left field, and that happened last year. This year, it happened with the new unique pricing. Dice, frame, sleeves. Perfect. Who's to say next year we don't see another change? Who's to say in a couple months we don't see another change? It's all about the approval process. Maybe stuff will be, just in the pipeline even at next YCS that we haven't seen yet. Because I think people didn't know about the frame and people didn't know about the dice for one of the events. Maybe it was like Sacramento or something. It's just like one of the weird ones, right? I think it's like people knew about the sleeves, they were told about the sleeves, but they weren't told about one or the other of these items. So, yeah, it could all just come at once, and we have this broken prize support going into the 2025-2026 season. And that would be awesome, That's what people wanted. If we get it, perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that was, other than that, the prizes were the same for top four. Fourth just gets same as eighth, and then third gets the prize card. Yeah, that's all the same. So
we didn't go over the prize card because again we're on our fake hiatus. You know what? Do it
doesn't matter. Yeah, it just
whatever.
doesn't.
We know the process that goes along with approval for a lot of this stuff without getting too deep into it. And this is just stuff that tends, Japan can be limiting. And I think these prize cards are, they're working with what they can really work with on the TCG end. We have to give them enough credit. The people working there know what we want, and they are doing their best. And they gave us something new, unique, and stuff that I think people will be happy with, right? Like, you can't complain about free, stuff on top of what we're already playing for, right? You didn't show up because of the dice, but now you're getting the dice. It's not a good way to look at it, but it is. If you're playing and you're going to these events, getting free stuff is always okay if you're doing well. More than okay with it. Do you guys want to we'll get into Master Duel real quick? I think really it was only just Ryan and myself that sort of played the Duelist Cup, or even just like looked at like modern Master Duel post Worlds. But I think Master Duel's been really, really good. Not necessarily the most skillful format with just how everything is structured. Like ladder still being best of one is whatever. But there's like some cool stuff has happened like post Worlds, right? So I think Worlds for Master Duel was probably more hype than Worlds for TCG. And there's probably like a bunch of reasons for this. I think Master Duel is a more fast-paced game, and it's more viewer-friendly, right? There's less like sitting there hitting the tank, and it's a lot more action-based, right? And that's what you want. It's like viewer engagement comes from watching these games just be like, really rapid back and forth, and you're seeing these people, maybe the clock is running out, and they're having to do this like APM battles between each other, and that's sort of like cool, unique, and there was story and substance behind Master Duel. That's not to say, TCG and Duel Links fell flat, but it's just like you have the finals and it's two teams that were played in the finals last year. And that's really cool. It's really unique. And I think maybe that also probably led to why Master Duel Worlds itself was a lot more, I don't know the word for this, but it's just a lot more engaging, maybe for the viewer, right? And then coming off that, I think they still, they got lightning in the bottle. They're still going with it. They implemented rated, which is like, so they have their rank system, but now they have a rank beyond master, I believe, and you get into ranked, and you have like this like ELO level, and you can be on the leaderboard, and it's like top 10 and stuff like that. Really great stuff. Glad to see they finally initiated it, and you're seeing a lot of people just like come to the forefront. Like there's people that I know that played Yu-Gi-Oh in Australia, and they've qualified for Worlds. They sort of took a hiatus, and they didn't really feel compelled to play Master Duel ranked because there was no end goal. There's no leaderboard. There's no, you play Duelist Cups, and that's the extent of it. And I'm watching him, grind ranked and get to rank 1 against all of these, OCG, TCG. He's playing against his, Ryan Hughes and stuff like that. He's playing against his Tasakus, all of the Korean players, all just really, really good Master Duel players and TCG players as well. And he's just, having something to play for. He's on the leaderboard. He's ranked 1. He's ranked 2. He's just up there, and that's cool. That's interesting to me. I like that. It gives you a platform for a lot of these names as well, because you see the leaderboard, and then you'll be like, okay, like cool. Like we didn't have a leaderboard before, and now we know this person is rank 1 in Master Duel. Let's try and catch their stream. and it sort of adds to that level of like building a player versus building the game, because the game's already there. You don't have to build the game. You build the player. The player is your marketing for the game, and that's where I think this ranked and rated system has become really, really good for Master Duel itself. They also had a ban list, and they had some other releases, and they had a Duelist Cup. Ryan, you and I played a bit of the Duelist Cup. I sort of just sat there and backseated you for a bit while you were trying to get the hang of it. Like, how did you feel? Like, I think we had quite a lot of fun just like sitting and just talking while you played.
It was a lot of like.
Just silly, right? It didn't feel like Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's like it sort of felt like Yu-Gi-Oh, right? It's like a different learning curve. You sort of just have to like identify how things work in Master Duel compared, like not even compared to like TCG. It's like it's a different game entirely sometimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was also like my first experience playing Yu-Gi-Oh again for a while, right? Where I was just like
where it wasn't the Symphonic Warrior deck, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Where yeah, where like, you know, I hadn't played again. So like it was kind of cool for me because even though I hadn't played in a couple months, since Master Duel was a couple months behind, it was like right where I had or it was like the set after I had like kind of stopped playing a lot, right? So there was U-Bell, but there wasn't Fiendsmith. So I got to kind of experience like the first wave of like U-Bell stuff that I had not previously, you know, like really played against. And then Volcanics was in Master Duel well before it was in the TCG, so I got to play against that. I was playing the Fire King deck a little bit and Centurion, so I was kind of just refamiliarizing myself with the Snake Eyes cards, because those were the last cards that I had played with previously. But I enjoyed it for the most part. It was pretty like it was pretty gratifying, kind of relearning all that stuff and winning games that even just, you know, I've been playing for like maybe on like Saturday I was winning games and I was like, I'm pretty sure on Thursday I would have lost this game. You know, just because of like the volume of games I was playing and how much more and how I was acclimating back to it. But it was interesting to kind of see almost in real time, like he's beginning to believe, and just like rediscovering all of it. It was a lot of fun.
I also, maybe it was probably a bit different for you because you went in with zero expectations, like, with your playing, right? Like you were solely playing for fun. And I think I think at the end of it, after, you know, I was sitting there, because I took a break from playing and I was like, I'll watch you and I'll just like, you know, get you up to speed with a lot of, you know, how the Master Duel format's played and like, you know, what cards are legal. And I think like at the end of it, you were at like 25, 30K and we're probably like, a day and a half into the thing. Yeah. And like, that was like pretty sizable. Like you went on a pretty reasonable streak. Yeah. And I think maybe that's something a lot more of the TCG people need to look at. And I think a lot of them are doing that, because if you look at the Master Duel teams for Worlds this year for 2024, you'll see a lot more of the players were TCG players as opposed to last year, where it was like honestly, a lot of them were unique to Master Duel themselves. Like my team captain Costas like did not touch a paper Yu-Gi-Oh card until, you know, we were in Japan and people were giving them to him as gifts. Like he only played Master Duel. But just seeing that sort of shift, especially because people realize, hey, wait, like we can qualify for this and I can take 3 of my friends and it's a 3v3 and it's the world championship. You know, we saw the teams of like Cam, Neil, Dennis, Christian Urena. We saw DB Grinder, Josh Kipp, and Enzo, you know, and then your standards like the European TCG team as a Master Duel team that qualified with all TCG players. You saw the standard Jesse grouping. You saw the Josh Schmidt grouping that qualified last year. But like these are all TCG players that have migrated to Master Duel and just like, you know, applied stuff that they learned in TCG and then sort of just like worked in the skill set. And you have Ryan Yu, who's just the god of Yu-Gi-Oh at the current juncture. Yeah. And well, I mean, Jesse's the god. I don't know. It depends how you want to look at it. But Ryan, the fact that Ryan was able to win 2 of these Duelist Cups, he's either a psychopath or a genius. And that Japanese dude, yeah, he's on par with that too. I think there's some of the maybe not best duelists in a vacuum in terms of just like technical play, but you need to be good at Yu-Gi-Oh, and then I think you need to have something on top to be able to do that consistently. And the person who won the Duelist Cup was Tasuku, and he had an 80K end score. I think it was like 81 or maybe 79. And second place again was my Australian friend Onagiza, world's representative, YCS winner. He just had 67K. That's a big gap, but like knowing that there isn't a chance that you can dethrone, you can box with God essentially.
Yeah.
There is a way, a little bit more experience. Maybe he will get there. He's played other video games like League of Legends, Dota, stuff like that. I think that's just like transferable skills, and if you're good at Yu-Gi-Oh, it definitely helps.
For sure.
Yeah, it's like you play Hearthstone, you played ranked, you grinded ranked, right? You sort of just have to transition all of it and sort of look at it that way.
I didn't start playing like I didn't for a lot of it. I was just playing rated, right? Like I didn't really play the Duelist Cup until like the second day, like so and then by the end of it, when I was playing, I was like, I think next Duelist Cup I might just try to play the whole time. Like I might just start playing when it goes live and then see where we are after day one and then make a decision if I'm gonna, black hole the next 2 days into doing it. But it wasn't, I played about a third or like a half of the time the Duelist Cup was up, and it didn't seem impossible, right? Like I thought about it and I'm like, yes, I'm fine at Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I could probably do this. Like I could probably win some games.
It's a good refresh to know that like you don't have to be God Emperor Duelist totally on the entire time.
Yeah.
Because you're just playing a volume of games, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you need to have that sort of the mental fortitude to not fatigue and not tilt and sort of just, be able to play that volume of games. And, you don't have to be at 100% efficiency in terms of your technical play. You need to maybe be at like, I want to say, just above the 50% line. And then just have that 60% to 70% win rate. And then you sort of hit parity. And that's when, everything comes to you and it's perfect. And like I said, the other stuff they're implementing is like the World's Points thing that they did this year as well, where it's like, it's cumulative based on how you perform. So even if you feel like you're getting gatekept by some of the broken Japanese and Southeast Asian players that do so well in these events, because sometimes I'm looking at them and I'm just like, I don't think I can ever compete, but maybe I can get some points and I'll qualify that way. But yeah, like I think there's so many cool things with Master Duel specifically. I love what they're doing with it. I'm really happy with Master Duel.
I really enjoyed the Tenpai simulator.
I mean, it's still exploitable. I don't know. Like Tenpai was something that we cooled off quite quick.
Right now, it's not as fun as it was last month. But yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you. I think when you get to like ranked or like top, like rated, right? Essentially, when you have like an ELO like level and you're playing against other top players, people are just like self metagaming, and we've seen like not necessarily unique decks, but they're decks that are sort of like trying to accommodate for Tenpai and other decks. And in a best of one format, you will lose to Tenpai. It doesn't matter, but it's no more Tenpai simulated than IRL. I think, in my opinion at least, I don't think Tenpai is the be all end all. I do think it has to be kept in check for sure. But it's a fun new toy. People get to try it, and hopefully before the Duelist Cup, we see some hits to it, similar to what we saw with a bunch of the other cards, like Master Duel Banless being able to be fixed in real time almost, right? Like they can change stuff at the drop of a hat, and it doesn't actually affect anything. Like it'll affect gameplay, but doesn't affect the person specifically. Maybe the one person whose focal point of their deck gets banned, like maybe like Runic Fountain gets banned. Oh no, my Runic cards are worthless now. I will not get the full dust reimbursement. But just the silly stuff, right? Like they banned Jalgan after they banned Gimmick Puppet. The easy solution is to ban Sanctifier, but they're just incrementally hitting the silly cards instead. And that's stuff that I feel like you don't really get to see in TCG because that just doesn't make sense for a paper card game. But in a digital one, we're able to do stuff like that, and it's completely reasonable. Or like holding off releases. Some stuff isn't available in Master Duel compared to TCG, right? Like some of the card pool is just not there. And like that's another thing where it's like Master Duel is its own entity, but the only thing transferable is just like, basic general Yu-Gi-Oh! Technical play. You just how to play the game. It's fine. You're basically playing a different format. And it's the same thing when you go to Worlds, right? When we went to Worlds, did we think the Worlds format was going to be anything but that weekend? No, definitely not. we were just lucky enough that it sort of translated into maybe a little bit of what TCG was / ended up being compared to where OCG was. But yeah. I'm happy to see where Yu-Gi-Oh ends up, right? A lot of cool things, a lot of cool stuff happening. That's before we even get into stuff like Duel Links. Like Duel Links has the Rush Duel stuff as well. Like I don't really play that, but yeah. I think 2025 is going to be pretty decent. I'm more interested to see if they keep calling it the 25th anniversary, but that's just me.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
At least for another 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy with whatever they throw us, but if they give us 25th anniversary into 2026, I might have to complain.
Yeah. All right, Jeff, do you have any closing thoughts? Or are we
No, I think it's basically
All
covered
right.
everything on our list. Yeah, Master Duel was the last thing. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for listening. We do appreciate you hopefully sticking with us through our hiatus, and hope you enjoyed this one. I like to believe this was more or less a return to form. I think we talked about actual relevant things that we were kind of passionate about for the first time in a while. So hopefully this was informative and entertaining and enjoyable. And I think next up we will be talking about crossover breakers. I think that's because that is, for North America at least, the next YCS will be played with crossover breakers. I'm looking forward to the Rizal deck, and I know Jeff is looking forward to the Malice deck. So in the next hopefully week or two, we will have some talking points about those decks. We can talk about that set coming out, and then we can talk about preparation up leading up into YCS Anaheim. So exciting stuff, and we're happy to be here. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.